Sonic and the Black Knight is the second and last game in the Sonic Storybook Series. This time, Tetsu Kitano was tasked with directing the game after previously working as the lead programmer on Sonic Adventure, Adventure 2, and Heroes. Kitano always liked the idea of having Sonic wield a sword and thus set the game in the world of Camelot. If you've seen my previous video about Sonic and the Secret Rings, then you already know my opinions weren't exactly positive. So did Black Knight provide a better experience? The story in Sonic and the Black Knight is told in a similar fashion as Secret Rings. Characters mostly interact through still illustrations, but instead of moving comic panels, things are a bit more animated to take up the whole screen. The art style itself has a sort of squiggle vision thing going on, which helps provide more movement. Although personally I found the drawings in Secret Rings to be more interesting in their stylization versus the ones used here. As I said, the story is set in Camelot, and similar to the Arabian Nights and Secret Rings, this world resides in the storybook about King Arthur. The game begins with the Black Knight chasing Merlina the Wizard, who summons Sonic the Camelot to assist her before making her escape. The Black Knight then orders 3 of the Knights of the Round Table to hunt them down, and like the last game, Sonic's friends make up most of the core characters that are brought from the original stories. In this case, Shadow is Lancelot, Knuckles is Gwaine, and Blaze is Percival. Sonic learns from Merlina that the Black Knight is actually King Arthur, but has been corrupted by the scabbard of Excalibur and is now immortal, and also a gigantic asshole. You gotta be one with shoulders like that. Hey bro, do you wanna play World of Warcraft? Sonic, with Merlina's help, acquires Caliburn, a shit-talking sword.
That's kinda sorry looking.
Fool! You are the chosen one. You are but a squire.
Oh yeah? Says you.
The sword has a mind of its own. It selects its bearer.
Yeah, well, it's got a pretty smart mouth on it for a sword.
The impertinent one is you, knave.
Merlina goes into hiding because she'd be recognized in town, and not because she's the actual villain of this game, while Sonic and Caliburn head off to find the blacksmith that'll help sharpen the sword's dull body. They later find the blacksmith, in this case Tails, who works his magic on Caliburn before disappearing from the story entirely. You think by now Tails would get a bit more to do, you know? It's like they said, hey, Tails, we know you're Sonic's best friend and all, but whatever, fuck you kid, just sit there behind your counter with your adorably catchy rendition of your theme song and deal with it. God, I love this. Sonic sets out to find Nimue, the Lady of the Lake, but first encounters Lancelot.
What shall it be? Will you abandon your sword and flee?
Sounds good to me!
Sonic wins the duel and takes Lancelot's sword. You know, just cuz. Maybe that was a thing that knights did? I don't fucking know. Upon reaching Nimue, played by Amy, she tells Sonic that she'll only help him if he completes 3 tests in 3 days and becomes a true knight. As Sonic completes his tasks, he finds a crying child in the woods who tells him that— oh my god, what the fuck is that? The child tells him that their village was attacked by a dragon, which Sonic sets out to stop. On the way, he runs into Gwaine, defeating him before he can kill himself out of shame.
What's up with all this drama?
After saving the village, Nimue reveals herself to be the child from earlier, rewarding Sonic's passing of her tests with the knowledge that they can use the sacred swords of the Knights of the Round Table to stop the scabbard's power. Having obtained 2 swords already, Sonic finds Percival, defeats her, and saves her life as well. With all 3 sacred swords, Sonic finds and defeats the Black Knight. Then the credits roll, and you can't skip them despite this obviously not being the actual ending. Why? Merlina reveals that King Arthur was just an illusion created by Merlin before taking the scabbard herself in order to become the new queen. Sonic and the Knights manage to escape, with Nimue instructing them to set up a barrier around the kingdom using the swords, but after doing so it ends up being too weak anyway. Merlina says that she knows the kingdom will eventually end and wants to use her newfound power to make it last forever.
You disgust me, you senseless bitch!
She then follows up her explanation by beating the shit out of Sonic for a few minutes and breaking Caliburn in half. Sonic's refusal to back down, combined with the sacred swords, transforms him into Excalibur Sonic, while Caliburn is repaired and transformed into the true Excalibur. Merlina also undergoes a transformation, becoming the Dark Queen, only to be defeated. You think after 2 games, the whole horribly designed boss fight floating in an endless void thing would get old, but, you know, whatever, fuck it. Sonic tells Merlina that everything has to end at some point, so they should live their life to the fullest, and that maybe turning into a giant crazy demon witch isn't really the best idea. Lancelot says that without King Arthur, the Knights would have to disband, but Caliburn reminds them that he is the one who chooses the king, and thus, Sonic is deemed the true King Arthur. Compared to Secret Rings, I find this story to be a lot more solid in its direction and simplicity. I wouldn't exactly call the story of Secret Rings complex, but with the game's mission structure causing awkward pacing issues, it usually felt like a series of semi-related events happening before the story could really continue, and it doesn't really help that things could end up out of order. Black Knight's story, on the other hand, flows much better, and a lot of that can be contributed to the game's mission structure, which gives a very clear indication of what needs to be done. It's more of the same goofy lightheartedness that Secret Rings had, but with a bit more focus. Voice acting is about what you would expect, with Jason Griffith and the rest of the Sonic cast from this period reprising their roles. And as a plus, it's kinda nice to hear Amy deliver lines without any yelling or sass.
Don't panic! I'll handle that bag of bolts!
Ah!
Did you see it? Where is it now?
If I tell ya, will you marry me?
No way!
I thought I had you this time.
Amy, what are you doing here?
Sonic, this time there's no way out of marrying me.
This is my mission.
Absolutely not. This way, I'll be able to keep my eyes on you.
Ugh.
Visually, Black Knight has seen a leap from Secret Rings. While many of the environments don't show quite as much variety as before, with everything from flying ruins to dinosaurs, there has been an obvious improvement to lighting and textures throughout. Areas like Molten Mine, Shrouded Forest, and the Cauldron do look impressive at times, and levels like Titanic Plain provide some big open areas to run through, which feels refreshing despite the gameplay still being locked onto a set path. The animations, however, still feel off in places, especially when Sonic looks like he's running faster than what his animation should allow. The music in this game is there. It is nicely orchestrated with the emphasis now on strings and Celtic themes, but it doesn't feel very catchy or memorable across any of the stages. Some tracks, done by Jun Sonoe, feel right out of Adventure 2 with recognizable slap bass and heavy guitar. While others try to create a more epic sounding score that feels like a generic fantasy movie track. The soundtrack of Secret Rings may have been all over the place, but at least it left me with some memorable tunes. Now, unlike in my Secret Rings video, I don't really feel the need to discuss the differences between each area's main acts, simply because there isn't enough variety in both the gameplay and the level design itself to really justify it. The level design in Black Knight is incredibly bland, which can be attributed to the game's emphasis on sword combat. Unlike Secret Rings, Black Knight uses both the Wii Remote and the nunchuck, and I cannot put into words how happy this made me. Sonic can move with the analog stick and is no longer running forward at all times, which also means there's no more need for a brake button. Sonic can jump, air dash, homing attack, and stomp all with the A button, while swinging the Wii Remote controls the sword. Using the sword feels like what you might expect from a typical Wii game. There is no one-to-one control here, so simply flinging the Wii Remote in any direction you wish will result in Sonic swinging the sword with whichever animation he chooses. Sonic can do a basic sword combo on the ground, while in the air he does a spinning multi-hit attack. Something that the game didn't show me, but I found to be very useful, was combining the homing attack with the aerial sword attack. The homing attack doesn't actually do any damage in this game, but if you swing the Wii Remote just as you start the animation, or after you bounce off the enemy, Sonic will slash through several enemies at once, chaining together a big combo while also keeping up speed. This became my go-to for the majority of enemies, as I naturally wanted to keep up my momentum. You can, of course, stop and have a typical sword fight with these guys, but standard combat just isn't very satisfying. The Wii Remote can at times feel like there's a big delay between the controller and the sword, and in general the feeling of battling wave after wave of the same enemies just gives the stage a heavy stop-and-go feel. It makes me think of levels from past games like Sonic Heroes, where you're having fun running through a cool level, only to stop in your tracks and have a switch puzzle thrown at you. However, the only time there's a need to focus on the combat entirely is during the boss fights with the other knights. These fights, while still very easy, can actually be kind of fun. The other bosses, by comparison, are not very good, with the Black Knight himself being an absolute pain to fight. The whole thing just centers around swinging the Wii Remote when his sword starts to glow, but the lack of responsiveness in the motion control does not make it easy to react in time to hit. Now, since I didn't focus on the combat much, I was just kind of left with a level to run through, and as I said earlier, the game emphasizes combat a lot more than the stuff I expect from a Sonic game. Secret Rings had terrible level design as well, but the focus on platforming made it feel a lot closer to Sonic than Black Knight does. Yes, there is the occasional grind rail here and fairy spring there, but as a whole, running through these stages feels incredibly brain dead. Much of what happens is done automatically, with things like jumping between poles occurring in a scripted fashion. In fact, the only challenge I faced at all came from the fight with the Black Knight as well as the first level in the Cauldron, which admittedly cost me quite a few deaths. But not once did I die anywhere else or outright fail a mission objective. Now, there are very few things that I find overwhelmingly frustrating or just completely unfair, like in Secret Rings, which is good, but at the same time, Black Knight plays it so safe that I'm left feeling bored. It's better than feeling frustrated, of course, but I wish there was some sort of middle ground here. You do get some things to spice up the gameplay over time. Early on, Sonic gets the Soul Gauge, much like in the previous game, except now it functions primarily as another tool for the sword. You fill up the soul gauge by collecting red fairies. Oh, and instead of springs, there are blue fairies. And instead of rings, there are yellow fairies, although they do make a ring sound, which leads me to believe that Sonic is robbing them.
Guess I can't be the hero every time.
When activated, Sonic will slow down time while a target reticle closes in on an enemy, and swinging the sword will let him chain attacks together. If there are no enemies around, it'll simply have Sonic run faster, similar to using Speed Break and Secret Rings. I'm all for the flexibility, but as I said, I don't really care for the stop-and-go feel that this game already gives me. So having to do these very slow but admittedly satisfying attacks is just not something I cared to use very often. Aside from the standard reach the goal and kill X amount of enemies objectives, there are a few other mission types, although you don't see too many of them if you just stick to the main story missions, which by the way are much easier to understand this time around. You no longer have to play a bunch of missions in the hopes that you complete the one that moves the story along. Black Knight gives a very clear indication of what the next goal is and how it pertains to the story, which, isn't that hard. Could have done that before. At the end of missions, you get a rank and various bonuses, but now instead of gaining experience to purchase new abilities, you simply level up your particular fighting style and gain various new abilities along with that. There are 3 styles to choose from: Knight, Paladin, and Cavalier. Knight is your starting style, and it's what you use throughout most of the game, acting like a balanced style between speed and power, while Paladin is more strength focused and Cavalier is more speed focused. As far as Sonic's moves and combos go, all 3 styles play the exact same, so the only differences between them are in the abilities. Some carry over between styles while others are unique, but all in all they are mostly supportive abilities like increased speed or starting missions with rings. Something I found really interesting was that the other 3 knights actually become playable very late into the game, albeit in only 5 specific areas. Unlike switching styles with Sonic, each character does bring a slightly different playstyle. Lancelot is similar to Sonic, with his attacks and soul gauge working roughly the same way, but with different animations. Gwen can glide and uses swords as boomerangs, while Percival has a more fencing style to her attacks, and she can even use her fiery tornado move from Sonic 06. It's a cool addition to have these characters playable, but again, the focus on uniqueness in combat does not appeal to me since I don't find the combat to be entertaining, so I tend to just stick with Sonic at all times. Maybe a New Game Plus mode that allowed all characters from the start would have provided a better reason for using them. Oh, and speaking of reasons for using them, you also get the ability to craft different weapons for them to use. From the very start of the game, you can spend ID points to identify items that you've acquired, and it happens after every single mission. Playing this for the first time, I had no idea what I was supposed to do with this, and it wasn't until the last bit of the game that I unlocked the weapon option for the Blacksmith. Many of the items that I had obtained were meant for crafting new weapons, which can only be used for the knights. I couldn't even craft anything because I was still missing a massive amount of resources even after finishing the game, and the thought of grinding level after level in the hopes of getting certain item drops is not something that appeals to me in a Sonic game. Weirdly enough, there is online functionality where you can trade items with your friends to help collect the ones you need, but I can't imagine this being a popular thing when this game came out. I mean, the game itself wasn't that popular, let me tell you. Oh yeah, I almost forgot. Black Knight has a battle mode, but it requires 2 or more players. Apparently the battle mode sucks though, so, whatever. Oh, and you can look at fan art too. Some of it's pretty good. Some of it is not so good. So that about sums up my thoughts on Sonic and the Black Knight. Comparing this game as a whole to Secret Rings, Black Knight is by far the more enjoyable game overall, and much of that is because I was able to get through it without too much pain or frustration. At the same time, it was so simple, easy, and lacking in variety to the point where nothing really stood out or felt memorable to me. Secret Rings, for what it's worth, does feel much more like a Sonic game, while Black Knight's emphasis on sword combat simply takes too much of the uniqueness away from Sonic's character, and everything else in the game kinda suffers for it. Still, it's nice to have a control scheme that doesn't suck complete ass. I feel a lot more willing to return to this game from time to time, but that's only because I find it playable, whereas Secret Rings is simply a chore. For a Wii title, Black Knight's a solid game. Just don't expect much of a Sonic game out of it. I hope you guys enjoyed my ramblings on these 2 games. I had a lot of fun making these videos. I have plans to discuss other Sonic games in the future, but I won't be getting to them immediately as I have other video ideas that I want to get started on. But if there are any particular games in the franchise that you'd like me to see covered, feel free to let me know in the comments. Chances are I'll end up getting to it eventually. As always, thank you for watching.